Metalheads, we're just a few days away from the latest disc by Opeth. Can't believe it's finally here. We've never had to wait this long. It's been 5 years, and the build-up is even bigger considering the fact that this will be the first time in, well, quite a while now that we are going to be getting the roots of death metal infused into the latest album. Plus, this is the first time since Still Life that it will be a fully, fleshed out concept story that comes with it. I don't know about you, but I can't wait. We will most certainly do another episode where we give you our thoughts on, our reaction and therefore basically review of the latest album. But before that, let's see what kind of mysteries of the band we can unlock through the artwork. After all, Mikael, let's be honest, he's always liked to keep things pretty secretive, private, mysterious, partially because that's the band, branding, but also because he's very old school. Seems to be a common trend with the Swedish rockers in that approach of don't say everything, let be a mystery and let, everyone else decide for themselves what it means to them. Nonetheless, there is so much for us to learn, not to mention the fact that the art in general will become such an integral part of the band as their career will continue, especially with the relationship between Mikael and Travis Smith. Travis Smith would wind up becoming the long-term, artist and partner of the band from the visual, point of view. So, join me, I'm Veer Von Wright of Grafikmetal, on the latest episode where we unpack and unveil the art of Opeth. All right, first up, we got their debut album, Orchid, 1995. By far the most straightforward and simple art that they've done. But it's worth mentioning that something that's interesting about it is the fact that it is a photograph of an orchid. Fun fact that the photographer was a Torbjorn and that the orchid was actually ordered from the Netherlands for some reason. But the fact that it is an orchid, right? The orchid, I think what it symbolically represents, remember that this album is also unusual and that is by far the most, it's more melodic death metal than it is any of the other styles that they would be known for. This one's a little bit more unique in that regard. But the fact that it is melodic death metal, I think it inherently fits perfectly, besides the obvious, which is the album title and the linkage there. But ultimately, the flower, the orchid, is both, beautiful and mysterious because it's isolated in just a black. So it kind of literally almost depicts melodic death metal as a visual reference. So that's really interesting. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that is unusual about this band is that they have no EPs. They just jumped right to a full-length LP. Correct me if I'm wrong, that is, but that I'm aware of. This band has not had any EPs. It's very unusual. Up next, we got Morningrise, 96. A few things that are really interesting here is that first and foremost, from a visual thematic standpoint, since this album is their most, black metal-ish. I know I'm probably going to get, attacked for this, but to me, I feel like this album, more than any other albums, feels the most black metal, and I think it's because of the fact that it is very 50-50 in the split between the raw death metal and the very subtle, intimate, acoustic, gentle side of things, which I think fused together is kind of a trademark black metal vibe. Furthermore, is then that album cover, because it's black and white and because of its connection with nature, it also feels very thematically like a black metal, design or feeling, right? The other thing that's really interesting about the background of how this one came to be is that ultimately the head of Candlelight Records, this is the record label that they were under, which we'll talk a little bit more about because there's actually something to be shared about that. But before that is that ultimately the head of the record company, he actually went on vacation to Bath, England, I guess, and ultimately sent a postcard of this bridge, right? This bridge is actually the Palladian Bridge in Prior Park. and ultimately they liked it, and so they end up going with basically the photograph of, depicting of that bridge. And naturally, because of, the vibe of it and the fact that it's black and white, it would be the first introduction of something that would become a common theme from here on out, which is mystery, suspense, unknown, the feeling of unknown and uncertainty, which is very well captured, even if it is very simple. So let's move on. Next, we have My Arms, Your Hearse in 98. This one comes with something very, very interesting, which is that this one ultimately originated as a photograph that was taken by ex-guitarist Peter Lindgren. Actually, apparently the photo was originally taken in 97. And what's also really interesting about this is that because it's, photoshopped or edited in such a way where it brings this very, purplishy, kind of mix of dark black and purple, and almost kind of like going after like the inspiration of like almost like Black Sabbath-y kind of like vibe, even though this album is not really so much doom metal. In fact, if anything, musically, this is probably the first introduction of what they would become very known for during the middle section of their career, which is prog death. This one is much simpler, right? Where it's, I think it took the essence of what they were going for sonically with the first two albums, but they ended up making it much more concentrated. It's much more simple as far as even the song lengths are shortened significantly. This is actually the second shortest album that they've ever released. But as far as the album artwork, what's really interesting here is that you basically can't see it in the actual state if you actually purchase the album because of all the editing done. But if you see the original photograph, you're actually able to see much clearer than that. In fact, there is a figure in the middle. This apparently was actually his girlfriend at the time, wearing basically makeup and then a cloaked dress or whatever, right? And so what I find particularly interesting about this one is that by far, this is the one where I wish that it was just kept as it is. To me, the photograph is way more effective than, the filtering that happens on top of this. I know that ultimately the band would become known for their dark and mysterious nature. But I've actually not been a big fan of it. As a designer, I'm not a huge fan of using darkness as an effective nature to build mystery. To me, that's an excuse, right? It's a hack. It's a safe route to go by. It's like, well, when in doubt, just make it so dark that you really can't see anything, and it by nature automatically then builds the suspense. Yeah, I know. Horror films have been doing this for centuries, right? But the point is that this is the perfect example where if you look at the original raw photograph, at least that we're aware of, according to Peter, is that to me, this adds just as much suspense, mystery, and curiosity as the edited version. But yet at the same time, it's just so much more visually appealing because you're getting the raw nature of the environment. You're being able to be infused into the environment. And I feel like the fact that you can see more of the details of the figure and its relationship to the environment is just way more effective. Not to mention the fact that the photograph is actually quite beautiful in the sense of it's, first of all, everything blends really well. Like the nature, right, and the figure, it blends so well, especially the trees or bushes that kind of open the gap of like the water, right, that's peeking through. That automatically creates a sense of like a valley, right? And the fact that then the figure is so dark and mysterious, it brings so much more to the table. So this is the one time where I actually really dislike all the photo editing that ends up happening on it, even though I do like the color theme, right, and the fact that it's like purplishy and black. I always like the combination of purple and black, but nonetheless, this one, right, is really truly taking then the next level of the mystery and suspense, and most importantly, what would become a very, very common trend with this with this band is the mysterious figure. A figure that I think is an integral part to build the connection of the emotional messages and the theme that the songs are trying to depict in a mysterious way that attaches us to it from a human level, right? Since it's a character, right? It's a human-like ishy figure. So let's move forward. Up next, we have Still Life, 1999, which comes with a lot of new things. First and foremost, that musically and sonically, it sees them move even further away from death metal, black metal, melodic death metal into straight up prog metal. Some will still argue as death prog, but regardless, personally, I think in this middle area here, I think that it's really just prog metal. But regardless, the other thing that it introduces is Travis Smith, the artist that has now been with the band ever since. It's a happy accident how that happened. Basically, Travis just simply was intrigued by the band and told that to a client that he had at the time in his early stages, and it just happened to be that they knew Mikael. So next thing you know, he gets an email from Mikael, and they keep in touch, and then one thing leads to another, and then voila, now they've been together as a partnership for ever since. Obviously, this now sees, even though it's pretty clear that initially he wanted to keep with the theme and the feeling, and who knows, Mikael also probably play a key role in wanting to make sure that was mysterious. But interestingly enough, as Travis has mentioned, that he didn't actually hear the music or even know the concept of the story before actually creating the artwork. Also worth noting that similar to the previous, my Hearse, this one also is a fully fledged concept story. This story is basically depicting of a figure, a character he's banished from his town because he doesn't believe in their religion, or because he's against, or attacking, or, whatever, wants to go away or away from their belief system, so to speak. And then ultimately, though, after a long time, ends up coming back to reunite with his girlfriend, who goes by, the character name is Melinda. And Melinda ultimately is the main character of this story, and experiencing the feelings, the emotions, the dread, the isolation, the fear, the anger that she feels because of what ends up coming next, and obviously then the death of her partner, right? And so it's obviously dark and heavy, but it's also interesting and important to note that this is also really just coming through symbolically to represent, because Mikael has never been a big fan of religion. He never likes saying that he's anti-Christianity or religion, but he just simply challenges the dictatorship feeling of having to believe in certain beliefs and certain things. In fact, in general, one of the things that he hates more than anything else, is we come to find out, he hates being told what to do, what to say, how to act. He likes having that freedom of being himself. So, right? A few of the key smart things that Travis would do is that, well, for one thing, is that he ends up creating a pretty decent amount of art for this series. But the album cover itself, ultimately, right, is obviously focusing on Melinda, right, and because of the body posture and whatnot, it's showing that, the dread, right? The sadness, right? That emotion, right? But yet at the same time, because it's, blended and it's, photoshopped to make it so it's a little more mysterious in nature. Also, obviously, the cross, it was probably important, maybe even to Mikael, I don't know, but because of the connection then to the religion aspect. So that's the reason for that. Otherwise, you also have the very common theme here, which is trees. Trees in particular, along with sometimes, water, body of water, but especially trees would become a common theme here. And I feel like maybe there's an interesting element, the connection between nature symbolically representing how Mikael has always been a little more old school, a little bit more simple, and much more focused on grounding himself to nature and to humanity and to emotions and so forth. Then, of course, last but not least, is the fact that what's interesting, what's unique about this one is that Travis makes the decision to be very red, and the red, obviously, theme is intentional to really create that emotion that it's trying to tell. So next, as we now move on to the pivotal, huge moment in time, which is 2001's Blackwater Park. What's important to recognize here is that, a lot of people feel like, especially at the time when it was happening live, like this was the album. This was the announcement of the band, and where like the popularity of the band really truly came into shape. And it was, highly, recognized and winning a whole bunch of awards, and just, was a really big deal. But the truth of the matter is that the reality is that it's less that this album, right, is different, special compared to the albums leading into it, and more the fact that this was actually the first time that everybody actually got to really meet the band and see them live. You see, up to this point, for the first 10 years of their existence, right, basically 1990 to 2000, they only had one tour. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? One tour in 10 years. This is something that really frustrated Mikael and the rest of the band, but it ultimately just came down to finances and bad business, through the partnership that, the record label that they had in the contract at that time. They just for whatever reason had a really hard time finding opportunities to get them, booked in tours and shows and so forth. So because of that, not to mention that there's the other key factor is that this would be the first album that was co-produced with Steven Wilson. This also is a crazy story how Mikael and Steven end up actually meeting. So apparently, Mikael, again, old school, right? We got a common theme here. He finally gets onto the interwebs, right, for the first time. And he claims that one of his very first emails he ever got and actually read was from Steven Wilson, basically just glowingly, giving praise for Still Life, the album before that. And so, therefore, by association, Mikael was intrigued and wanting to meet Steven, right? Steven was starting to get a lot of attention from, his Porcupine Tree, band. So they went to have dinner, and by the end of the night, ultimately, Mikael asked Steven to help produce the latest album, and he said yes. The thing that is particularly unique about this album, even more so than the other, few albums upcoming that Steven would also co-produce, this one is very much heavily influenced by Steven. The imprint of Steven Wilson is on this completely. I mean, to the point where if you don't even, if you completely blind yourself from, band brand and the title and the artwork and so forth, and you just listen to this, you would think and assume that this is a Porcupine Tree or Steven Wilson album than it is an Opeth. Not saying that Opeth's not there, right? Just saying that it's heavily the trademark feeling, the sound, the song structures, the essence of what makes Steven Wilson, especially during his time with Porcupine Tree. So that's what makes this album unique. As far as the artwork, so again, then Travis Smith would once again would capture the artwork here. And again, you see the common theme here of the body of water, right, surrounded by the creepy trees, right? And naturally, because of the creepy willows and so forth, the bark and the nature of the tree itself is this creepy. It's very creepy, right? It's vibey, right? Plus it's very, the saturation level is taken almost all the way. It's not black and white, still some sepia in there, a little bit of color, but generally speaking, it's almost there. But the other thing that not everybody necessarily recognizes is that in the background, in the middle, is actually creepy figures. Again, these creepy figures, something that is just something that they love to do. Again, I think that it's almost like it's leveraging like the essence of like a horror. It's like, a horror, story ultimately needs the combination of the eerie, mysterious vibe, the environment, right? But it also needs that connection to a human figure, character, something. It doesn't even have to be human necessarily, but just a figure, right? That's key, because that's where then we really kind of draw our ability to relate to it and create an extra level of dark and mysterious nature to a suspense, the creepiness, right? It's like, who are these figures? What are they wanting, from us, or whatever it may be? And the fact that like you can barely see them, and the fact that they're so similar to the shape of the trees, you don't even really notice. And then it almost makes you correlate the question of whether or not there's a difference between them, or that there is a similarity there, right? That they came through that, or who knows, whatever. So that's kind of the general theme of the Blackwater Park album and artwork. So let's move forward. Next, we have the double album. Deliverance in 2002, and then Damnation in 2003. The reissue would just combine them all together, since that was kind of the part of the whole point. But regardless, this then once again sees Travis really hit home that technique that he really likes to bring, and therefore by association the branding and the vibe of the brand of Opeth, which is again dark, mysterious environment, focusing on the environment and the figures within the environment, and creating a lot of emotion through that. So in the case with Deliverance, is that it's creating a room, this dark, creepy room that makes it feel very isolated. You also have the fact that there's the figure, again, this figure, mysterious figure in the background, in this case through peeking out through the mirror. This one's extra creepy because of that nature. There's always something extra, emotional and dark and scary whenever you see like somebody peeping out from a window and looking into a room, right? That's always just danger, alerting to us. This one is completely fully black and white, which was probably most commonly a smart decision, because then by association you do that with both of them, so this way they link them together. In the case with Deliverance, it's just that figure looking into the room, whereas Damnation is actually the opposite way of looking at it, that the figure is the prominent, similar to what it was with Melinda in Still Life. You just see the figure, and because the figure is depicted, the head is facing down, right, and the body, position, not to mention then the fact that you have in the background on the table, it's almost as if this figure, right, this character was actually, it's having their own tea party alone. Again, that creates isolation, it creates dread, it creates this emotional sorrow, right? It's also supposed to be depicting, mental health, related depression, right, so to speak. So naturally, this emotion, this darkness is captured through these environment rooms, plus the figures, the creepy figures, or the, emotional figure in the case with Damnation, and then the black and white, element, and the fact that, again, heavily photoshopped, so this way you can't really necessarily make out of everything, and then the single source of light, right? That will be a key common theme here, which I think is directly linked to, I think it's a happy accident, but I think it's something to learn about, again, this band, and especially Michael, is that the singular viewpoint, that source of light, is also representative of the eye vision of Michael, but also the fact that that's how he likes to operate as an artist. It's very similar to, Tobias or all these other, Who else? You got, drawing a blank on Trent Reznor. Trent Reznor was the other one I was thinking of. But there's a bunch of them. But it's this old school approach to wanting much more control as an artist and having a particular viewpoint for you to observe and to experience, in this case, the music, the album, the artwork, the story, the message that it's depicting, rather than, it being just this wide open, free-for-all, right? So that's very, very important here. What I also think is really clever that Travis does is that, despite that they're both black and white, right, ultimately, but Deliverance is black. It's a lot of blacks, darker. Whereas Damnation is lighter, a lot more white color. Why is that significant? Well, what is the direct difference between Damnation and Deliverance? Deliverance is their death metal, prog death, black, melodic death, essence, versus Damnation is them for the first time going intimate, simple. Right, which is partially why this album is so unique and special to a lot of people. In fact, fun fact, what's kind of ironic about this band is that the despite them being such a polarizing, influential, extreme metal band, their most popular and successful album just happens to be their softest, most intimate, most gentle in Damnation, which is, this one ultimately is very simple. It's just a couple acoustic guitars, being picked up by a couple microphones with clean amps and a Strat sound with, neck pickups. Most importantly, though, Mikael only sings, no death growls. Yes, he would experiment and have this fused Morningrise on forward on certain songs or certain moments and segments within the songs. But this is straight up all the way. It's the first time that this would happen. The other fun fact here is that the room itself, the environment, right, since it's an important role, the photographs were actually taken at I believe it's the Wally House. The Wally House is actually infamous. It's located at the Old Town in San Diego, California. It's famous because it is well known as being very, very haunted. It's a haunted house, right? Ghost hunters are obsessed with this house. It is in fact supposedly the most haunted house in America. So that's actually where it was captured, which obviously makes a lot of sense, and that will weirdly enough actually pay off the symbolism of what comes next. So this is something that's really interesting about this band and the artwork and the relationship between Mikael and Travis. Part of the huge benefit of working with the same artist all the way through in your career, or at least a long time, is that you have the luxury of being able to get ahead of things. So something that's really fascinating is that there is always a direct connection between the previous album and what's coming ahead on the next one. It's really interesting. So in this case, Ghosts. Ghost Reveries is next, 2005. And a lot of common themes here. Travis Smith, still designer, and a single source of the environment, right? The mysterious environment. In this case, it looks old, right? Probably like the Victorian area or older, because especially like the windows is probably like, and how old the candles look. Somewhere around that time period would probably be most likely. We're not entirely sure, but all we need to know is it's old. The single source of light, unless you count also the candle flames themselves, but ultimately the light coming out of the one window, and of course that dark, mysterious, creepy figure. In this case, though, this figure has a lot more detail, at least enough that if you look close enough, that you probably have an idea of what it is, and that is the fact that it looks like they're wearing a cloak, and the fact that it looks like they're holding a scythe probably means that is death, which also correlates to the fact that then through the smoke coming from the flames of the candles being burned, looks like it's been burning for quite a while, right? Is then like that coming from the shape of this could be an abstract representation of ghosts, right? Hence the theme and the name. Either that or that creepy character is ultimately just a really angry gardener that is ghost hunting. But regardless, odds are pretty good that it probably is Death. Musically, by most people's standards, not saying it's mine, I'll probably do my own ranking at some point down the road, but by the masses, I think generally speaking, people consider this to be their quote-unquote masterpiece, sonically, musically, that is. But regardless, I also told you that there is a deeper meaning, right, attached to the theme and the art work and the concept of each album. And this is particularly now especially the case with this album moving forward. So in the case here is its correlation to, this moment in time and also looking ahead, is that in many ways, because of the nature of this album and thinking about the past and the memories attached to, thinking back, is that I think that this is symbolically representing Mikael contemplating and conflicted about the nature of becoming now known as for all intents and purposes, a death metal band. Sure, they have all the other, prog and melodic and black, elements, but ultimately people see them as extreme, or a death metal band, right? So, but it's clearly something that Mikael does not wants to move away from. You got to remember, even from day one, even after the first album, like that's been something that's been rooted in him is wanting to constantly change and evolve and never staying, stagnant, right? And I think that at this moment was him reflecting back on the experiences and looking back in a positive way and all the great things that came out of this, but at the same time, dreading what's to come, which is wanting to probably move away, to push, right? But fearing what will happen by doing so. Which leads to Watershed. Watershed symbolically, literally is Mikael announcing to the world that this is it. This is our Watershed moment. Watershed ultimately it's supposed to be taken literally, right? As far as the title, Watershed is ultimately a moment in time, a shift in direction, right? That's ultimately what it is. And so this is basically him saying, hey, this is it. We're putting away our death metal roots in favor of something new, something else. To make note of is that despite the fact that musically it's pretty similar to the other albums up to this point, Lopez and Lindgren actually, are now gone from the band. So from there, it's also like interesting because visually and then also thematically through the stories and through the character is that it's interesting because it's almost as if even the special edition, the fact that like the cover then is basically a stamped letter, right? To almost like the figure that ultimately is a representation of like a funeral. It's interesting. It's almost as if like it's the funeral of the figure that writes the letter that sends it to himself. Or again, I mean, I'm taking liberties here and thinking that that's kind of how it is, which to me almost literally represents Mikael himself, the conflicting nature of, having to deal with that, wanting to change, wanting to pivot, but then knowing that people are going to view him a certain way and potentially be angry at him because of this. And one of the things that's also really interesting of Mikael is that he has been, open, despite the fact that he is a very important figure in metal. Right, obviously, right. He's a really big deal. But despite his huge success, at least from a critical standpoint and fandom for what he's accomplished and him as an individual, is the fact that he still to this day claims that he is very uncomfortable. He has very little confidence in himself, especially performing live. He always still gets nervous still to this day. That's what he says, anyways. And you kind of can sense this in the messages and the themes from albums here for not to mention then the partnership with Travis, which means then how much is that being influenced too of wanting to depict that it could be, I don't know if it's Michael influencing Travis or Travis wanting to be reflecting of Michael's character or taking liberties there, who knows. But regardless, that's really interesting here. You also have to admit that what's also interesting, for up to this point is Travis's decision to wanting to consistently always have like a different color theme, generally speaking, within each of different albums. So in this case, this is kind of almost like the green and black, typo negative, kind of essence of the band, which, obviously, again, same, rhythmic patterns here, single source of light from the window shining into the black room, right? The creepy emptiness, the isolation, there just being one figure, in this case, of the backside, let alone, of the figure itself. So this is also from a visual standpoint, this is where things really kind of like get interesting. So the figure is George. That's the supposedly the character. The thing that's interesting is on the back cover, the back side of the photo is of the figure, a face of this George. But if you look closely, and rumored to be then that actually how like the formation of the face is actually created through elements using each of the bandmates at the time, which is why it looks so crazy, strange, and weird looking. So as mentioned, there's always the linkage, right, thematically from the previous album to the next one. In this case, again, this was the announcement that there was going to be a shift, a change. In this case, Heritage, up next, is, well, very sonically different. Musically, that is, and also visually, since that was part of the whole point. So now, they are now a prog rock band, right? And because of this, it's smart for Travis, Michael, and so forth to, change then visually the depiction of this band, since there's so much a shift in now direction. So in this case, gone is the darkness, the blacks, right? And just that mystery side of things from that regard. What is, ultimately prog rock more than anything else? Visually, thematically, abstract illustrations, crazy ideas, symbolism, so every which way imaginable. So this was a smart decision. And for me personally, I will admit that this is now where I really kind of believed in Travis. So up to this point, style-wise, I told you, I feel like it's a little gimmicky to use so much of the darkness. It led me to like, what exactly is he doing kind of thing. So I feel like now we really kind of see, the full breadth of his capability. And so I was really excited to see this. And if you look closely, there's a lot of symbolism, to unpack here. So you have naturally the whole like tree of life, element. You also have then the fact that, the tree in its roots is coming from the ground, which underneath the ground, it looks like, hell, right? Which basically then is symbolic to say, hey, through our death metal roots, we now have formed into this new form of ourselves, right? You also have the fact that within the trees themselves is each of the members' faces kind of acting like he is fruit, like apples, right? Within the tree. You also have specifically Wilberg's head falling from the tree, symbolically representing the fact that, his departure ultimately. There's also then the skulls that are laying on the ground, which I think represents the past members. There's been a number of them, right? Okay, so you notice like the lineup of people that are coming to the tree, to pick the tree. I think this is a direct comment symbolically to say, hey, we know you're probably going to hate us for doing this, again, specifically Michael. But we don't care. We're doing this anyways. And I think that it's almost representing this nervous nature, right? We're exposing ourselves, to this change and very concerned about the reaction it's going to be, and deservingly so, because what would end up coming is, well, that's exactly what ended up happening. Naturally, I mean, this is kind of what happens when a band makes that much of a pivot change. Although, interestingly enough, worth mentioning that, I mean, look, Damnation was pretty damn different of a change, and yet people were welcoming that with open arms. So that's also interesting, worth noting. But nonetheless, there's also in the background is the burning city, which I think is very important too, because this has been, like Mikael consistently always talking about, what actually be a common theme now moving forward. His kind of message is symbolically from a religious standpoint, also a civilization standpoint. He is not a big fan of modern culture, and he likes more of the old style, and is much more an old-rooted kind of individual and approach to things. And so I think that this ultimately represents, like, the decline in civilization, right? In addition, so a number of symbolic things here, but most importantly is that it's just overall great to see now. The change, you go from photo to illustration, you go from the vibrant colors from the darkness, right? And you have, all sorts of light now instead of a single source of light. You have all the symbolism, right, that comes with it. And by nature, that's much more exciting and interesting, because you can pay off so many interesting things which would come to become a common theme here moving forward. But that other thing I mentioned about then that the civilization is important, because also what comes out of that is through then to the message to the next one, which is Hail Communion, which ultimately kind of means like the sharing of intimate thoughts and feelings, but with little intent or, more important, significance or importance. This is critical, because ultimately this is basically Mikael saying, hey, we know that you're unhappy with me or happy with the band, right? But we don't care, right? Doing it anyways, right? Standing by being a true artist and not being dictated what to do, but rather letting himself as an artist fuel the inspiration, the ideas, right? That's the direct, meaning here. Plus, there's also the symbolism then, if you look at the correlation of the paintings within them, the direct correlation then to civilization, to religion, and these other messages that he's consistently always liked to say in the background. So, when you look at these paintings, so ultimately this is the artwork ultimately is a triptych, so which is it's basically like a medieval art religious piece, right? The three paintings, right? Each of them contain a certain Latin text or quote from a historical figure. So on the left panel, you have quote from Axel, which was a Swedish first chancellor, to his son in the 17th century. Don't you know, my son, with how little wisdom the world is governed? This quote is often used to kind of make used as the beginning of politics as science. So symbolically towards then using politics as a form of science and influencing our decision making, especially within a government or civil. So the middle panel quotes Terence, a Roman playwright. In these days, friends are won through flattery. The truth gives birth to hate. This quote is often then used to mark the end of days and the erosion of society. Common theme, remember? In the right panel, it quotes Marcus Aurelius, who it says, he grieves truly who grieves without a witness, which is symbolic then of the nature of, the passing away and, that the nature of basically the living and the non-living, right? The relationship between that and the grieving nature of that. In other words, oftentimes we overlook the fact that it's not just the person who passes away that is impacted, but also the people surrounding that's just as impactful in the emotion that comes with it. Next now is Sorceress. And what's interesting here is that, as I mentioned, the build-up before on Heritage then was, the civilization coming to an end. And then it shifts to the reflection on it and what comes after or through it. And then now with Sorceress, this one's interesting, where this is a personal reflection of, well, ultimately Mikael himself. And also is very personal to him. This is the most personal, probably, even though he will never say it. I mentioned that he likes keeping things a mystery and not actually telling really much of anything, or very details. So he always likes to kind of, say, like, ultimately just generically, like, well, I gotta sing something, so here's some lyrics. He doesn't really actually say anything. But if you connect the dots here, and especially then the timing of things, which we'll get to in this moment, this is a very reflective and personal touch, which I think is then symbolically also visually represented by the dual nature of, then you have this beautiful thing like the peacock that is doing a vile, evil thing, which is, eating a whole bunch of figures, right? Humans, people, things, right? So obviously skulls, right? My point is that it's, sitting on top of skulls, right? So it's creating that dual nature, right? Now, what's also interesting is that, again, you could look at the simplicity nature of this as it's almost like a giant middle finger. Again, we know you hate that we're continuing as a prog rock band, but I don't care, right? And he also infamously was quoted in an interview at this time saying that, I don't hate people who don't that hate our new direction, but what he does hate is people trying to tell him what to do. It's ultimately a big, common theme with Mikael in general. He doesn't like that aspect. He doesn't like the sense of not being in control. Right? So the other thing that symbolically Sorceress could represent is almost like the power and influence that the band has had in the rock and metal community, which is something that Mikael really is not a big fan of. In his minds, he doesn't like all the credit that he's gotten or the band has gotten. In his eyes, he just views himself and the band as just being one of millions of musical artists. He doesn't really like getting that much attention. In other words, he's a very humble genius, right? But also mentioning that, this whole style, then this prog rock style. So the other thing that's really interesting about him is that he's rumored to have one of the largest record libraries, as he likes to call it, a collector there is. And there's a song Wildflowers is actually a band during the early 60s, a Canterbury band that actually never actually created any music, but through them came Caravan and Soft Machine, which huge fan. And also the seventh Sojourn is homage to the Moody Blues, along with also Jethro Tull influences. So he also even actually has indicated, at least his own library, he basically kind of has a rule of thumb is that he's obsessed with specifically prog rock pre-1976. He has this belief that like 1976 is the line in the sand where all of a sudden the production sound turned to crap in his eyes. And then as far as the back cover, also the front cover to the back cover, they basically are symbolically representing the exact same thing. It's just that now it's shifting away from nature to a little bit more of a human perspective, and because then it's more humane, it also then by association shows like the beautiful woman, right? Again, the beauty part, doing a vile thing, in this case almost like ripping out the soul. Well, this is critical. I mentioned that there's also a deeper, more intimate or personal aspect to this specific album. Because at that same time, he then would actually get divorced by his wife at the time, Anna. And he is, again, likes to keep things personal. He likes to make sure that there's a distance and separation between his personal life and him as, well, a musician ultimately. But we have, gotten the impression that it did not go so well. That, look, we know he will never come out, and say anything directly influenced. But he has said, that there was particularly at that time, he was dealing with a lot of heavy emotions, stating, look, like at the end of the day, like, I don't care who you are, if you get in the middle of a chaotic relationship, right, where you feel ultimately like you're being mistreated, you're going to cultivate some weird thoughts in your mind, and it's just going to happen. Love is a crazy, bloody thing. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, on one hand, all you need is it, right? Love is the most powerful and most beautiful thing. But at the same time, when you're in the middle of difficult times, oh boy, it can really affect you, and not in a positive way, which leads to in Cauda Venenum, which is Latin for poison in the tongue. In the tail, right? Poison in the tail. And it's actually the first album that can be heard in both English and in Swedish, which is pretty cool. Also, the first time without drummer, longtime Martin. So there's that. Also, it's their longest album to date, which is also pretty cool. The artwork is, though, really interesting on this one. Probably his strongest one as far as, again, taking it up a notch and a lot more even more symbolism. There's actually a couple different versions, naturally, of all of this artwork. This one, Travis goes the extra mile. He's done so much artwork for this kind of particular period, because he just was really captivated by a lot of the symbolism opportunities to kind of play off of it, and he really liked the style that he was working with for this one, and just really wanted to experiment. Plus, he got to get draw the members on Scorpion body, which is pretty cool, right? And so with this one, right, I want to particularly focus on not the original version of the album cover, but rather the newer version of it that is really, really interesting, because this is the one ultimately that would end up getting used for even like the tour, the posters, and a lot of the other merch and things of that nature, and just got used a lot more heavily. And I think it's because it's really cool, because ultimately it's a reflection and a memory to everything that they've done up to this point. But before I go into that version and the references for each of the different albums, on a bigger picture, like thematically, what's also kind of, not everybody necessarily notices, especially because it's cropped, but ultimately it also is literally representing of the title, because the house and the environment, the land, right, and the property is actually sitting on top of a demon's tongue. so there's the literal representation. But going back to saying the references to each of the different albums up to this point. So, okay, ready for this? All right. So, Orchid. Okay, you have there's the flower next to the grave, plus the ultimately also the weeping moon for the song reference. Morningrise, you have the for the song Black Rose, which is the black roses on the vase in the bottom left window. Plus, also you could argue that the brick of the building is kind of similar to the brick found in the bridge, and also the water, looking on the right side, could also be representing then from the front of the river to the bridge. You also have my arms, your hearse, with the creepy lady in the front of the body of water, which you wouldn't, again, if you look at the original of the Arbit Cup, because of all the filtering that happens, well, the color saturation and whatnot, you're not going to notice it. But the original photo, this is the key part, because then when you see that, then you really see the figure, and then now you really see that connection in this case. Still life, the top left window is ultimately Melinda. Blackwater Park, the trees on the left with like shadowy people behind them, could also argue that the ivy along the front door looks kind of like the middle section of the tree branches from BWP. Deliverance and Damnation, ultimately it's both the same, with the doll in the top right window, plus also just the having like a creepy figure peeping out of the window in general for Deliverance sake. Ghost, Reveries, look into the middle window, and you'll see, first you see the little candles, right? Then there's also even those three like dots of color of like orange yellowishy that symbolically also represent a creepy figure in the background. And also, if you look even on the cover on the album cover of Ghost Reveries, that same pattern is literally there also in the original cover art. Watershed. Front right window is the front view, not the back view of Watershed, but the front view of George most likely. Plus also the butler looks like he may be holding a letter, which could be that same letter. Okay, for heritage, you have the red evil roots coming up around the carriage through the brick road. And also that same butler then also kind of looks like similar to the first male figure in the lineup, Pale Communion. This is probably the trickiest one, but actually, and it could have took me a little while, but eventually, if you look actually the third panel, the painting of Pale Communion, you'll notice that there are exactly 5 gravestones. Okay, just happens to be there's also those same 5 gravestones in the artwork. It's just scattered throughout, I think 3 and then 2. So there's that. Then you have Sorceress. Obviously, you have literally the peacock standing in the fountain of blood. The blood, and even the fact that it looks like the peacock is literally even sitting on a skull, that's really hard to see. You have to really get up close with it. And then in Cauda Venenum, obviously the entire artwork. Right, literally is a representation of it. So then there's the correlation. Now, again, we've had to wait 5 years for the most recent, right? But there still is that connection, because then that house-like figure, now we're moving inside the mansion-like, creepy kind of house-like environment. Again, remember, environment and also figures, characters play the biggest role symbolically to the visual branding of the band Opeth. So the latest album, The Last Will and Testament. I mentioned they're going to be doing an entire review, thoughts on the album, but as far as the artwork leading into this, so I think it would be interesting to reflect on it just purely at this moment. Because right off the bat, we see that Travis and Mikael already made a really smart decision in going right back to the dark, very dark, mysterious environment, mysterious characters, just the blur nature, the photo effect, the photo in general, right? So shifting back into that environment, because that is the whole point of this album too, is the fact that it's bringing back the roots of the death metal infused into this new sound for the new album. Plus, then there's the fact that this is the first full-fledged album concept, story-wise, as it was with Still Life. So with this one, the story concept ultimately is a period piece, right? Big on the period piece element. So in this case, this is post-World War I. And it basically tells a story of a large family coming back, gathering, regrouping together in the old family house because the father has passed away. And so this is them now getting, heard, of the being told of the will, right? So this is hence the last will and testament, and for the passing of them, the father at the family home. And the point is that it ultimately the will unveils some dark, shocking, mysterious family secrets. So that's like the theme of it. But going back to the fitting nature of then the mansion, I think that's also a smart correlation then from the previous, as I mentioned, that was a common theme, which is really cool. And then I'm sure that there's going to be potentially some interesting takeaways when actually reviewing the entire album and listening and reading the story and the lyrics and whatnot, that we may pick up on further details inside with each of the characters. But basically, you know, from what you can tell, you just see really interesting, you know, characters. It's just enjoyable to kind of peek through and look and investigate on each one individually. But nonetheless, it's really a smart way to kind of build back now this new direction once again, back to, you know, like the fact that it's a family reuniting, right, together. That's that relationship, right? This is that, you know, uncomfortable but important, you know, feeling of remembering and coming back to terms with your roots, your death metal roots, right? And the feelings that will come out of it and the impact that will come out of it. And I think that the fact that ultimately this is dark secrets being exposed, I think that this is also Mikael basically kind of saying like, okay, wanted to do this, but gotta admit, I'm a little bit nervous of what's gonna come out of this experiment. So there we go. That's the mysteries and the unpacking of the things that we can learn about this band, the symbolism, Mikael himself, you know, what the intention is both musically and visually through the artwork, especially with the partnership between Mikael and Travis, and just the really fascinating details that I think not everybody necessarily pays attention to. So, anywho, again, can't wait for the actual album to drop in just a few days. Again, we'll give, you know, feedback on that. As promised, still going to be coming very, very soon with Blood Incantation, the next episode in that series, along with doing the ranking of all King Gizzard albums very soon. Until next time, I'm Veer Von Wright. You've been watching Graphic Metal. Cheers and keep on rocking.